Ladies and gentlemen, a reading from Memoirs of a Swine, Volume 5, No Good Deed. I started to notice a feeling I remembered from decades ago when Todd was in college and Evan had run away. Evan was the preferred son, but Mom and Dad found out he was gay, so Dad screamed at him and cracked him in the head, first with a coffee pitcher and then with a nightstand telephone. As you do. I'd kept his secret for a year, but Evan had devised a plan to escape by faking his own death, and just like Mossop and Keenrick, the criminal's vanity always has them make one tiny but fatal mistake. Theirs was to have their entire conspiracy printed and published in play manuscript. Evan's was to write it out and diagram the plan and leave it for Mom to find. Dad beat him mercilessly. The house shook with it. The next day, Evan didn't come home from his after-school driving lesson. He was gone, and my parents were furious. For the first time in my life, I thought, not, "Oh, my poor brother," not, "Oh, brother, where art thou?" I thought, they have to love me now. I'm the only one left. Was it my finest moment? No. But if you read Volume 2 of this series, you know I don't defend anything I did before my coma and subsequent amnesia. And I spent 20 years apologizing to Evan after that before I finally gave up. Anyway, I noticed that feeling creeping back in while we sat talking around the dinner table. I'm the only one left. Dad will need me in the coming days to build his new wing. It'll just be me and him. He'll have to love me then. I sat up a little straighter in my chair and smiled more easily. My dad saw it, and a shadow crossed his face. He looked at us all seated around the table with drinks in our hands, and I saw his eyes flicker as he had an idea. Interrupting my wife, he announced that we were going to play a drinking game. My wife managed to keep the glare out of her eyes, watching my father smile his malevolent shit-eating grin at me. I could telepathically feel that she knew there was more afoot than just Dad's indifference to her. When he had a moment of awkward silence, he looked at Eric and Josh. "Great card game. We play it in Ireland all the time. You want to play, don't you?" Eric said, looking at Maria. "Sure." "It's called Presidents and Assholes. I think Johnny knows the rules better than I do. Isn't that true, Johnny?" I felt my back against the wall as the firing squad took aim. I saw everything around my father's face go dark and sparkle with dancing glitter. Then my wife said sternly, "We're a little old to play drinking games, aren't we?" All eyes cut sharply to her. "University was a long time ago," she added, and went on speaking as if she hadn't been interrupted at all. I felt the heat fade from my cheeks, and I cooled myself with a gulp of my drink. My wife was talking about how she would love to go to France since we were so close, and it would make up for my not taking her that one time I was dying. "What?" asked several of them at the same time. She laughed. "Oh yes, Johnny was dying of lung cancer and decided not to spend any money on treatment, since it probably wouldn't have saved him. He said he ought to spend the money on a trip to France instead, and what was it?" she added, looking at me to continue. I cleared my throat. I got an x-ray for a broken collarbone, and they said they saw a spot on my lung and thought it was lung cancer, and there was this great big scare. And I decided after I got past the bargaining stage and into the acceptance one that I'm not going to blow a ton of money fighting this. I'm going to spend the money that we would have spent on treatment, and we're going to go to Europe for my last trip. I never actually been to France. I've only helicoptered over Nice to get to the airport from Monaco. That one time Rebecca invited herself on the boat trip and seduced my father, I chose not to add. So I actually want to go see Paris, and we're planning this whole thing, and one of our best friends who's like my second mother, Odile, she's a stewardess for United, a French lady, awesome lady, and we were having dinner, like 10 of us. These are mostly our older friends. You know, somebody said, "Show me your friends and I'll show you your future," so I stopped hanging out with my barfly friends and limited all my friendships to now retired self-made millionaires. So there was a whole bunch of us having dinner, and while we were talking about this, I asked the best way to plan our trip to Paris, and that's when they told me, "You don't ever fly to Paris. It's ridiculously expensive. What you do is you fly into Berlin and rent a car and drive to Paris. It's a hell of a lot cheaper." And that's when I started to say, "Oh wow, it didn't occur to me that Berlin and Paris are so close together." But while I was in the middle of saying that, I realized the implications of what I was saying, and my voice lowered like a song that's fading out. And that's when a buddy of mine looked over and gave me this look, and he said, "Oh yeah, people have walked it. with this little smile, and I'm dying, but nobody else caught it. And I'm laughing, but trying not to laugh because, dude, that is just so freaking wrong. And I caught sight of myself in the mirror across the room, and this big forked vein was standing across my forehead as I'm chewing on my fist, trying not to laugh out loud. Oh, and by the way, we never actually made it to Paris because somebody recommended I get a second opinion, and I went and got another x-ray somewhere else. Found out I'm completely fine. Went back to the first place and they said, "Oh yeah, sorry, we were going to tell you our lens was dirty." Everybody burst out laughing except my father, who I think was annoyed that I was getting attention. But that's how it had to be from now on. I was equal. People had to listen to me too. I forget what brought it up, but my wife was talking about something she'd seen on Facebook, and she called it Facebooky. It made everybody laugh, and Eric asked with shining eyes if that's what people called it down her way. "Oh no," she said, "Johnny is the one who calls it that, and it just became our thing." They looked at me a little disappointed, but Josh asked if there was a reason for it, and I said, yeah, I'd learned some things about Portuguese. They can't end a word on a consonant, so in the case of loan words, they'll add a long E sound to the end. If it's a hyphenated word, both parts get an E. It's hilarious when you see guys looking like gangsters on TV trying to look tough and edgy and talking about hippie hoppy. Eric and Josh laughed, but Rebecca pursed her lips and looked down at the table for a bit. Dad noticed. Also, they don't pronounce the letter R like we do. To them, it's an H, and that's why Olaf says Hoist Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So if you're watching Brazilian MTV, they're talking about the latest hits in Hockey Holy, and I think that's a riot. So I started calling it Facebooky for a while. Then I picked up the quote for the beginning of Volume 3, the quote about saudade, and I'd been looking for a recording of people saying it so I could get the pronunciation right. Googling it, I found a video of a girl singing about Van Gogh's sunflowers in Portuguese and laughed when she pronounced his name Van Gogh. That's when Rebecca interrupted to correct me, saying his name isn't Van Gogh, it's Van Gogh. The rest of us frowned, but she smiled her smug little smile, happy with herself. It's like saying toff or enough. Now, I'd heard people in Ireland and the UK saying it like that, and I wanted to make sure, so I Googled it years ago and was happy to correct her correcting me. Actually, I said, it's pronounced Von Hoch and made a guttural sound, because it's Flemish. My wife flashing me that look again, her warning look. Eager to smooth over the wrinkle in the mood, Josh changed the subject. "Food's great here, isn't it? I've seen your restaurant posts on Facebooky and that looks good." "Thanks," I said. "We're trying a lot of new things right now, like desserts that have other flavors than just sugar." "Aren't desserts supposed to be sweet?" Dad asked. Excuse me, there's a bunch of ash coming from the volcano. Oof. "Well, yeah, of course, but not just sugar. Like we'll chop the top off of a pineapple to make it flat so it'll sit upside down overnight. And all the fructose that normally pools in the bottom, it'll permeate the whole thing, making it taste much sweeter without having to add processed sugar." "Sounds like you're overcomplicating things," he said. "Or making desserts that aren't sweet, like this one cheesecake that was more boozy and bitter and tart. It had some sugar, yeah, but it also had ricotta, cacao nibs, orange zest, and Fernet Branca. The sauce we poured on top, hibiscus essence. I thought that tartness really brought it all together." I waited a moment for applause that never came. My dad looked at everyone else with that triumphant boy isn't he stupid look in his eyes and said, "Johnny, it's pronounced Fernet Branca, not Fernet." And I tried not to channel Julia when I said, "No, it's Fernet." The rest of the world says Fernet. They also say Gal Gadot and Brett Favre and Babe Newirth, but it's actually Fernet. "Bullshit, it's French." I shook my head. "It's Italian. I corrected a girl once when she said Fernet and she told me to look it up. I had to eat my words. And now so do you," I chose not to say. But I didn't have to because everybody knew that was exactly what I was thinking. "And what do you mean about Babe Newirth? That's her name," he said through his teeth. I shook my head. "It's Bibi." "The fuck it is. I saw someone ask her on an interview." "No, you didn't." I nodded. "She said people ask her all the time. It's Bibi, short for Beatrice. Your grandmother was named Beatrice, Dad shouted. We were all taken aback by his sudden anger, which maybe wasn't so sudden, come to think of it. Yeah, so? I asked defensively. She was just B, not BB. And that's okay. People choose to be called whatever they want. Besides, Mama's real name wasn't Beatrice anyway. What? Eric jumped in now, trying to stick up for me while calming my father down. Yes, we found out a little while ago. She was born Brigida, only she hated that name, and Baba let her change it when he was changing your last name from Scalizzi to Farrar. My father was livid. Who told you that? Did she tell you that? She's got dementia. She doesn't know her own name on a good day. It was on her birth certificate, Eric said with measured calmness. We asked her about it. Dad was breathing so heavily through his nose that his face was trembling, and Rebecca sat beside him with that faintest smile curving her toad-like lips. Then a change came over him, a malevolent glee, and he turned to my wife. You know where your husband gets all the lines he uses on the girls? The whores he dates? We used to listen to him in the kitchen telephone while he was talking to his girlfriends up in his room. I told him, if you're going to breathe heavily into something, find a shoe. Anyway, he'd repeat the lines from the movies we'd watch. Didn't have an original thought in his head. Did he ever say this to you? He looked at me with that shit-eating grin, and then put on a contrived face of anguish. Oh, I don't know what I want, but I know what I don't want. I don't want whatever came between us. And then he grinned like a jackal. He ever used that one on you? Who said that line, Don Johnny? There was a painful pause at the table, and the ticking of the kitchen clock was suddenly very loud. My wife pursed her lips, winding her napkin around one finger, twisting it until it almost ripped, then dropped it on the tablecloth and leaned back. I don't know which is more disturbing, she said, that you used to eavesdrop on his love talk, or that you remember it to humiliate him 20 years later. Then she pushed herself away from the table and stood. Well, look at the time. Tomorrow comes early. Johnny, if we're going to take that city bus tour, we better get to sleep. Then she went into the TV room and gathered up all of our stuff and carried it to the bedroom Todd and his family had occupied, claiming it for herself without a word. My mouth was very dry, and my lips kept sticking to my gums, but I said, maybe making us watch the same things over and over for years, like Blackadder, drilled those lines into our heads, instead of something worthwhile. I got up and went to our new bedroom, shutting the door quietly.